So have you ever created a mandala before? If you're new to creating mandalas, today I'm going to be sharing with you how you can create a very simple mandala, also using the benefits of color theory to create a beautiful art journal page. So last week we were talking about the color wheel, and the color wheel is a really great way of starting to understand how colors mix together and also how to use them in your art journal project. So first of all, I'm going to show you how you can create a color wheel shape. And the color wheel shape is the same as a Mandala shape. So this is where we're going to be using these techniques and overlapping them a bit, not only to create a color wheel, but also a good foundation for mandala. So you can make really large mandalas, you can make really small mandalas. This one's going to be going into my art journal, but if I'm with mandala making, and especially with a color wheel making, I like to be able to do it on a piece of paper to put into my art journal, just so that I can move it around easily and get my hand at the right angles for the best results. So first of all, we need to find the center of our paper. And so I know I'm about 8 1/4, so I want to make it 4 1/8. And then we want to flip it the other way, and then we want to be about 5 1/2 inches to be the center of the page. And so that's going to be my center mark right there. And I always just double check, so 5 1/2 is 11 divided by 2. And 8 1/4 is basically 4 1/8. And so that's your center section. So we want to draw ourselves a circle. And like a compass, you want to have that center mark. Basically, your circle maker is going to go into that center mark. And you want to decide what size of circle you want. I want about a 7-inch circle. So I basically found a 3 1/2 inch point there. And I'm basically creating my circle this way. And that's how you make a very simple circle. If you haven't yet seen my video about circle makers, check it out in the card above or in the description below. It is a fantastic video that's going to revolutionize how you do mandalas and how you use circles in your creative practice. And then from here, we need to make a decision on how many colors and how many sections we want in our color wheel. You could keep it really simple. You could just do the primary and secondary colors. I'm going to do primary, secondary, and tertiary. So I'm going to have it more like this color wheel. So instead of having an orange-yellow and a yellow-orange, I'm just going to have yellow-orange right down the center. And so like I see a few less spaces I need to fill in than this particular color wheel. It's really up to you how many colors you decide to use. And now moving to my helix circle and angle maker. So basically I have the large one here for making larger circles. And then if I want a circle that's smaller than 4 inches, I usually stick with this one. But what I really like about this one, it has the angle maker. So what you want to do is have the 0 point. You want to put your little dot there at the 0 point. It's best to have your 0 facing upward. And because I have 12 spots and we know they need to be equidistant, we know we have 360 degrees of angle. And so 360 degrees divided by 12 is 30. So basically we're just going to draw a line here at 0. Then we're going to move it to the 30-degree mark. And we're going to add in another line. And we're going to move it to the 60-degree mark and put in another line. And then we're going to continue to do this until we've added in all of our angles. So if you want to do mandalas a lot and you want the quickest way of creating your angles and your circles without a lot of fussing and messing around, this is my absolute favorite way. I really feel like this is just game changing. And there we go. So now we've added in our angles. So now all we have to do is go in with our ruler and just continue those angles out to the edge of the circle. So instead of trying to figure out how to measure and trying to pull out any other sort of tool, I love the Helix circle and angle maker just because you get so much versatility out of it. And I did do a comparison of a compass and an angle maker and a few of these tools in another video, which I have added in below. So check that out. I know a lot of people, once I shared that, were like, couldn't believe it was such a simple tool, but it is a really simple tool for getting really great angles and for getting really quick circles. And especially if you like doing a lot of mandalas, it simplifies your process. So now I've added the lines that we need for a color wheel, but I also want to add in the lines that we'll need for our mandalas. So I'm going to bring that circle maker back to the center, going to press it down with my fingers in the center, and then I'm just going to choose a few different circles. What's really nice about the circle maker is that you can just press it down in the center, and then you can just choose any sort of circles. So you have little circles on the inside of the one side, and then you have all of these dots, which gives you a lot of different variation for what you can do with those center areas. And sometimes if you slip, don't worry about it. You can just start again and erase any extra lines there that you don't want. I did slip in that last one, but I try not to worry too much about it. There's something on my paper that's causing things to catch a little bit. It's something to be aware of when you're trying to do this. And it's just an easy way of just adding in a variety of different lines. So I've added in my graphite, but I've added it quite dark. And part of that is so you can just see it on camera. I would generally go with a very light pencil for this and try to press as lightly as possible. But for the sake of this one, I wanted to put it on dark just so you could see it. But now what we can do is go in with a kneadable eraser, and we can lighten all of that graphite by just rolling it over the surface. And if you have areas that went on quite a bit darker, you can just press into that area or gently rub just to make those lines just a tiny bit more gentle. And then I'm just going to be pulling up a little bit of the graphite there, so now it's lightening it all. This is so that I still have those guidelines, I can still see them, they still work for me, but instead of them kind of taking over the project and you being distracted by them, now they fall a little bit farther into the background. And then just to clean your eraser, all you need to do is knead it, and you can use these things until they're almost black, and then that's when you know you need to replace them. So I have a few dark lines here, but most of them are on the circles, which I'm not as bothered by. I just wanted these lines here for my guidelines for my paint, but I didn't want them to take over from the mandala design. So when we're looking to add color here, we want to start by adding in our 3 primaries. All you really want to do is choose a red, a yellow, and a blue to start with, because these are going to be your primary colors going to end up on your color wheel. And you need to have these colors being equidistant apart. So I'm going to go in and just start by adding in a little bit of red. So the one thing we want to do, because we're turning this into mandala, is that's a very bright red. It's great, but it's going to be hard when you want to try to add in a lot of your color with a black pen. It's going to overwhelm the black. So what I'm doing is I'm actually going in with a bunch of water and just softening that out a little bit. And I'm using Bristol paper for this. I usually would use a hot press watercolor paper. I didn't have any available to use, so I'm using Bristol in its place. I could have used cold press watercolor paper. My only issue with cold press is even though I used fairly smooth cold press, I was worried it might just be a little bit harder for the pen work. And because we'll be spending quite a bit of time doing pen work, I wanted it to be a little bit easier to work with. And again, we're not going to get the same beautiful results as we do with watercolor paper as we do on Bristol using watercolors, but it is possible to still get a really nice combination of color. And so basically we've added in red because it's our primary color. We're adding in yellow, which is our next primary color, and we're leaving 3 spaces in between so we can add in our secondary and tertiary colors. If you don't understand any of these color terms, check out my video last week. I went into quite a bit of detail about these different colors, what they mean, and how they can be combined to create really beautiful art journal pages. And so just adding in our little areas of color, trying not to go too dark because we don't want to take over from the mandala art that we want to add. If you want to do this super dark, I'd say go for it, but then you're going to have to do a different color pen. You're not going to be able to use a black pen. And I plan to use a black pen today, which is why I'm going to keep the colors pretty light here. And so I'm just going to add in some of that blue. So now we have our 3 tertiary colors. And then this is where we're going to get into a little bit of the color mixing. And again, you don't have to use watercolor for this. You could be using acrylic paints for this. Just be aware that acrylic paints are going to hide a bunch of the lines. And that's part of the reason I'm working in watercolor instead of acrylic today. We now have our 3 primaries, and now we're going to work on our secondary colors. So we have yellow and red, so we're going to make some orange. And we're going to make some orange by taking a little bit of yellow, mixing it with this little bit of red. And the problem with the red sometimes is the red is a very strong color. Even though we're supposed to be going half and half yellow and red, I find there are different strengths of pigments, and I find sometimes it's really hard to get a really nice orange with yellow just because the yellow does want to overcompete. But now I've created a little pool of orange here that I feel like is a pretty neutral color. And now we're going to be adding in that orange to the space here. And so realize that there's certain pigments are always going to be a little bit stronger. I find that sometimes the blue pigments are quite strong. The red pigments are very strong. And so depending on the materials they're made with, they tend to sometimes take over when you're using them in color mixing. So it's just something to be aware of. Sometimes you just need to look at it as sneaking up on adding in the red, just so that you don't overdo too much of one color. And so just kind of add in a little bit of orange there. And you might feel like these are quite light. I don't mind the fact that they're quite light, because again, the whole point of this was to add a mandala shape on it. And I really want that mandala shape to really stand out. And so now we want to add in some green. So we're going to mix a little bit of blue together. I'm going to wash my brush. I'm going to pick up a little bit of yellow. If we combine them together, we should be able to get a pretty decent green. I feel like that's pretty much down the center. Sometimes you won't know until you add it to your page. That's almost a little less pigment than I want it to have. So I'm just going to again come in with a little bit more blue. Clean my brush, come in with a little bit more yellow. It should be back to the green, but it should be a little bit stronger in color. You'll notice that the Bristol paper is not going to want to blend into the surface quite as well. You got to work with it a little bit just to get a consistent flow and even look. And this is where I really would suggest for more illustration work, I like to use hot press watercolor paper. It's created a little bit differently than cold press. It gives you a lot of the benefits of watercolor paper, but because of the hot press finish, it's very smooth, which makes it excellent for illustration and for work like this. Let's add in our purple. And this is where I would actually come in with a little bit more of an intense blue to start with, just so that red doesn't take over as much. You can always water it down before adding it onto our mandala and onto a color wheel, but we don't want to start off too bright. Yeah, so you can see I'm touching it in just a little bit at a time, just trying to reach up to that purple without being too much. And then there, I went a little bit too far. Now I'm a little bit too far to the red. So I'm going to bring in a touch of the blue again, and we're going to play with this a little bit more. And sometimes it's a hard thing. So now we're a little bit too blue. So then we're going to go back in and add in a little bit of the red. And that's a pretty decent mid-tone purple. I wouldn't say it's too blue or too red, so I feel like I'm quite comfortable adding that onto my color wheel. And so that's the thing when you're first learning how to mix paints. And start with these very basic paint tones, because you can get into using 3 tones to mix a color. There's lots of different ways you can do color mixing, but let's start with some of the basics. And the basics is being able to just add in a little bit of color, being able to mix 2 of them together and seeing what result you get. And just through this type of practice and exercise, it's going to give you a lot more confidence about adding in your own colors. And you might be wondering, well, why would you not just grab a tube of green paint, grab a tube of orange paint instead of mixing with the primaries? I find that this creates what's called color harmony, which makes them feel a little bit more harmonious because they're all coming from the same base of colors. And also it's a nice thing if you want to save on paint or you want to buy some nicer paints, but you don't have the money to invest in every color. By learning to color mix, you'll be able to kind of use better quality materials and spend less money in the process. But you want to make sure that the next color you put on, that the colors next to them are dry. If we have an orange, we want to create an orange red. And so with the orange red, I want to grab a little bit of the red and mix it in with the orange. And so when we add that to our page, you're getting more of that warm orange tinge to it. So it's not red, but it's not orange either, which is why it's considered an orange-red color. Now we could go between the red and the purple and create a purple red. And now I'm just going to take a touch of that red and I'm mixing it in with that purple. And that one I actually took it a little bit too far. I might come in with just a touch of the blue. Try to get a more of a warm toned purple over our burgundy color. I can even go a little bit further with a little bit of the red there. That's a better color. That's kind of what we're going for. And so sometimes you need to put some color down and then you need to look at it and decide, well, is that the color I actually really want to show on this color wheel, or is it still too close to one of the other colors? Trying to have the idea that we're having an equal amount of the red and equal amount of the purple to create the next tertiary color. But I find that sometimes it's a little harder when you actually get to it. It's not always perfectly half and half, depending on the quality of the pigments you're using, depending on how they're mixing. It's not a perfect exercise, but I wanted to try to give you a sense of where you could go with this. And now we have our purple and we can add in a little bit more blue. So I'm going to grab from my blue here and add it into my purple. That should create a really nice purplish blue color. And what you're noticing too is now you're getting some darker tones. Mixing that purple and that blue together is giving you a very different tone and feel. And this creates a little bit more muted color, which is nice when you're trying to get a little bit more variation in color on your projects. And I would say I'm not a master on color mixing, but I did want to show you the concept, just so you have a place you can start. I've added a little bit of blue to the yellow, and now that's a really nice warm green. And that's the type of warm green that we're looking for. That's our tertiary color there. And then I'm cheating a little bit here, where usually I'd be like, I'll come to a green, and then I will add in some more blue. In this case, I'm shortcutting a little bit and just adding in a little bit more blue. And that was way too much blue. So I'm going to clean my brush and I'm going to come in with a little bit more yellow. So I find like if you want more of like a teal turquoise color or a nice kind of green blue that reminds you a little bit more of a dark forest or areas of the ocean, this is how you create it. Is with a little bit of green and blue together. So it's very different than the yellow tone that we have here. But you can see that just by using the colors that we have, go a long way to create us a really interesting combination of colors. And again, with each of these colors, you could play around with adding more and more and more blue, more and more green. This is just the tip of the iceberg, but I'm hoping this will give you an idea on how you can just doing a little bit of color mixing on your own, and then even just how you can incorporate it into your projects. And so for this last color, I just want to add in some orange with a little bit more yellow. Since I already have the orange there, it's going to add in a little bit more yellow. I know all the colors on my color wheel are not the same exact intensity. I was trying, but that happens. The key with this was trying to find color that wouldn't drown out the mandala markings that I'm going to add to this. And what I love about combining techniques like this is now what we're doing is we are creating a color wheel, so we got to get some color wheel practice, but now this is the basis of our mandala. And because now that we've added in all those extra circles, we have the lines where we can just start adding in our mandala. So I'm just going to let this dry completely before we look at adding any of the mandala on, because we don't want to wreck any of our pens by combining wet watercolor with pen ink. So I'm going to add in a bunch of our mandala shapes, and there's a lot of different designs you can use. There's a lot of different things. I'm going to be showing you some simple ones. So grab yourself a cup of tea, grab yourself your favorite beverage, and we're going to sit down and create a beautiful mandala. First thing we want to do is choose a pen, and really I'm just using a Pilot Perma ball pen. This is a pen a friend gave to me. And you can really use a ballpoint pen, you can use any pen, because we're using Bristol paper and watercolors, it gives us a little bit more option. And so I've started by adding a little circle in the center there, and now I'm going to add in my first line. So what you want to do is you want to follow the line that we had done in pencil. And I usually find the easiest way to try to keep a good circular shape is just to stroke as far as your hand will comfortably allow you. Pick it up, turn it, and stroke again. And this is why I don't usually do these directly in my journal. I have done them directly in my journal. It makes it kind of hard because then you can't turn your pages easily all the time, especially for a large journal. And so I'm just going to add in the first couple lines just so I can see them well. And this is going to help me kind of figure out what kind of design I want to start. And so the first thing I'm going to do is just create a little flower in the center. So I'm kind of going out to the one edge and coming around. You want to try to keep them as even as you can, but sometimes it's a little easier said than done. It takes a while to get really good consistency with mandalas. Even for me, I don't feel like I'm all that consistent. I'm better than I was, but I don't find it all that simple to be really consistent with all my shapes. And actually with the circle angle maker, I could have actually done these in black pen. I wasn't thinking about it at the time, otherwise that would probably have been a way to save myself quite a bit of time. But I also wanted to show this to you in case you don't have a circle and angle maker, what some of your options are and just how you can use a pen afterwards to fill in some of those lines. And I think I'm just gonna create a dash out like that on each of the petals. And because I just think it's fun, I'm just going to add a dot in the center of each of them. If at any point your pen doesn't seem to be flowing very well, find a scrap piece of paper and just write on it for a little bit. I find that sometimes it could be the watercolor, the fibers picking up into the pen. This is a quick way of fixing that. And so then from here, let's just add in some other marks. So I'm going to do a long mark at each of these little intersections. And then I'm going to be adding in a series of little shorter guys in between. A lot of it is repeating patterns, and I think that's what I find so relaxing about this process, is just a chance to create, to let your mind just think a little bit, to relax a little bit. 'Cause I think that's everything that our journaling is about, is finding a way for us to work through whatever we're working through, whether or not that's some feelings or some thoughts. I just think having a place to create that nothing is really expected of you. We all have our expectations throughout our day of what people want from us, what people expect from us. And so sometimes it's nice to have a little space where we can just create and meditate through art and maybe learn something new about ourselves. And this process is very therapeutic. It is very good for the mind and for the soul. And generally with most of these patterns, I want them to go further out. And because I did make a bit of a mess of this edge here, I'm just thickening the whole edge. That could be seen as just a thicker edge on this particular area. It could be seen as even its own little circle. It really is up to you, but I just think because there's a couple places where I made the same type of error, it's almost easier just to fix it like this instead of trying to being overly clever with it. So that already looks a lot better. And now you can choose your next shape. I like trying to have all the shapes point outwards to the edge. This is my personal preference. I'm just doing little half circles here and then going in and just filling in the centers there. Those first couple were not quite to plan, but that's okay. And this is a little bit of a thicker pen than what I usually use. I usually tend to use fairly fine line pens for a lot of my artwork, but it was fun to try something different. A ballpoint pen like this with a rolling ball that's quite inky, it's also a really nice option. And you also don't have to worry about being super gentle with it either. I love my fancy pens, but I do get a little bit worried I'm going to wreck them. So this one's a little bit nicer for being able to have something that's not too expensive, but still gives me really great results. And if you're interested in any of the supplies that I've used in today's project, just check out the description below. I've included the full supply list, and there are affiliate links in there, but that's just a way you can support this channel. So thank you so much for your support. Then if you feel like you want something else in there, which I do, I'm just going to add in a few dots just between each of the little areas there where they kind of curve down. You could also decide that you didn't want to fill in those and you could just leave them as like little petals and loops. I wanted to add in a little bit more. By just adding the mandala color on top, we're starting to get some really interesting looks to our color wheel here. And why I like adding these two together is it's an easy way to get your color down. But even more importantly, it's a chance to play around with mixing colors, and then it's a really great foundation for mandala. So the only difference really between the color wheel and the mandala is that you're just adding in some circles. Because most mandalas, you're ending up having to divide your piece of paper into a certain amount of sections just to get your image down. And I learned that the hard way when I was first learning to do mandalas is I used to go, oh, like, oh, I can eyeball it, it's okay. And they were a little bit lopsided and they were not very even. Let's just put it that way. And so I've learned my lesson. Take the time, add in the nice angles. That helix, circle, and angle maker, it just makes it easy. All you need to decide is how many sections you want. Divide by 360. That gives you exactly how many degrees of angle you need for your shape. It goes a long way for just simplifying things for me. Okay, and with this one, I'm just doing a really large leaf or petal shape, being really consistent. You could do it either up one side and then up the other one to try to keep it more consistent, or you can basically do it as one mark. It just depends on the shape that you want, how consistent your marks are, and what you're trying to do with it. I kind of want that tip to kind of be in the center of the area, but we have some options. It doesn't have to be perfect, and this is the thing. It's meant to be really relaxing, really fun. It's a chance for us just to find some quiet in our week, because the whole process of this is not fast. I find that sometimes just even trying to do this, I struggle, just because I feel like I need to be on. I need to always be doing something. Sometimes I have to throw on some music or do some other things just to help me even bring myself down enough that I can even enjoy this process. But it is so enjoyable. And so I'm going to do another circle down here like so. And then I'm going to do a little one. And I think what I want to do is add in lines. Every time I look at a shape, I kind of make a decision. Is there something different that I want to do with it than maybe the last time I did this? So the last time I did this, I didn't do any lines on it. But this one, I feel like it could use a little bit of that movement that the lines can cause. And so I'm starting the center and just angling them around. And you can make yours perfectly shaped. You could make them a little bit of a different angle, but this is the angle that I have chosen to use. Quite easier to start the bottom, just so I end up with the right shape. And I'm just taking my time. The video's sped up, so it seems like I'm doing this really quickly. This does take some time to do. And sometimes I don't even finish an entire one-on-one session. That's very typical for me not to always get it done in just one session, because sometimes it could be a bit of time, but it's a nice thing to pick away at too. So I feel like life is sometimes just speeding on by. I've definitely felt that very much this year, is that time is speeding on by, and am I ever going to catch up? And I think that's when we need this type of practice the most. Is the busier we're at and the more things we have going on, I think the more we actually need the solitude and the quiet of this type of creativity. I'm going to add in another row of dots. I find that sometimes it is nice to repeat a pattern, actually. And mine, I'm getting a little wonky. I feel like I need to adjust the page a bit before I start moving things. Just continue to turn it with my hand. Otherwise, I find my dots and my movements get a little bit wonky. And with this one, I purposely left spots where the tips were because I really didn't want them to be crowding that. With the next one, I'm just going to use another shape that I really like to use in a lot of my pieces, which is basically 3 curves, called like my 3 rainbows. That one's pretty big. But the first one's a little hard to start because it's trying to figure out the shape. The first one's going to be a bit big. It's going to look a little bit out of place, but that's okay. I think this is like a fun shape because it's easy. It's just, again, the 3 little rainbows. Add some really interesting texture and isn't hard to do. And you just keep changing the angles of them just to add some interest to your page. Just throw in these lines that I have here. So that's a pretty big area. I think I want to add in a couple more rows of imagery. I'm just trying to decide if I want to attempt it with my pen or if I want to use my pencil. I think I'm going to use my pencil just in case I make a mistake. I'd be really upset at this point if I had damaged all the work that I've already put into this piece. So mandalas, they are a bit of work. And I don't mean work as in, oh, well, it's really hard and it's really difficult. It's just a lot of time, right? And I love just how therapeutic they are. But they're not something that you can do in 5 minutes. But that's kind of the point as well, is you don't want to be doing these in 5 minutes. You want to be taking your time, doing something that's beautiful. When I complete pieces like this that do take a little bit of time, I tend to scan them just so that I have a copy of them before they go into my art journal. And if you've enjoyed what you've seen so far, if you could just please like this video. Every time you like this video, that just helps more people see it. And for a small channel like mine, that makes such a big difference. So thank you so much for your support. So when I'm trying to add extra circles, I try not to add them all super close together. So instead, I'm just going to add in just another little one here. If I had been brave at the beginning and I had actually used a pen, I would have just used a pen on the whole thing because these spots are big enough to put a ballpoint pen through. But just because I'm so far along, I'm a little bit worried that if I make a mistake or my pen slips, I'm too committed at this point to be willing to start again. So the next large one's going to be basically another kind of larger petal shape. You can decide if you want it more angled, less angled, more blocky or less blocky. Really, the choice is up to you on the final shape of these petals. And then once you add in a few of those shapes, then the next thing you want to do is figure out how you want to fill things in. So in this case, I'm making myself a little round area like that. I think of it like a tree shape, but it's not really a tree shape. It's like, or like a little flower shape, but it feels to me like it has the feeling of a little flower. And then I'm going around the little area with little dashes. I'm doing one branch up, another couple little branches, little branch down, couple of branches. And this is the thing, is you can use a lot of repetition with these ones, or you can make them fairly unique. Sometimes it's nice to add in a little bit of repetition though. It's a nice big space, so I do want to make this look quite decorative. And there's lots of patterns, lots of people doing mandalas, there's lots of people doing doodling, and really any of these little patterns can be found online. They can be found all over the place. And so it's just trying to show a little bit of imagination of, well, how can I add in something a little bit different that maybe I've seen somewhere? And that's a great place to start, is looking for mandala patterns or doodle patterns. That's a way that I've often continued to add things into my repertoire of like little patterns that I can use on pieces. Sometimes it works when you do one shape and do a few of them, and do another shape and do a few of them, and then start filling in the other details. Sometimes I find my hand gets a bit more practiced with the shape, and then I usually get slightly better results. And this is a fairly complex one that I've decided to do today. It's quite a bit larger than some of the ones that a lot of people will end up doing. Because again, 8 1/4 by 11-inch page is a pretty large page. So that makes a pretty large mandala. Because I think this mandala ended up being 7 inches across. So it's pretty large. So something to think about. You can always make these into really small mandalas if you want something a little bit smaller to work on. But I just wanted to show you kind of how far you could take it. And because I am working in a slightly larger art journal, I wanted to have a little bit more options with this. So the next shape I want to use is a simpler one. So I'm going to basically be going to add in a circle with another circle with inside of it and put a border in. And actually I'm adding a dot in the center as well. So this is a pretty big circle. If you're doing the bit smaller, if you had a smaller space you were trying to fill, you just do a circle and fill it in, or just create a circle shape. I find the larger the area, the more details I start adding, just so it doesn't look really empty. Instead, it looks like it was a design decision. And this final layer, I'm just going to basically just add in some triangles I don't want them to quite hit the top. And then in the triangles, I'm just going to add in a smaller triangle. And then I'm going to add a dot. And then I'm going to add in a little bit of that cross hatching. Add in some texture marks. And that's that. So that's going to be that final layer there before we start working on the outside. So the last step is figuring out how we want to finish the edges. And so you could just leave it like this. I like it this way, but I think I want to try to do something with the edges. I'm just trying to figure out how to do it in a way that it's going to look really good. The key, I think, with this is making sure that you divide every piece of pie into two. And then what I'm going to do is just do a little image like that. And actually, in this case, they're going a little bit past. But that's okay. And I think the key with getting a very good shape with this is coming back to the middle for each of them. This is a shape I have not really mastered, but that's okay. I wanted to show it to you anyways. So I find that I don't get them perfectly even. I get one side really good and the other side suffers a little bit. And I'm realizing I'm not getting them perfectly within the pie shape, so I'm not even going to worry about it. In this case, it's just a finishing touch for this art journal page. So I need to work a little bit more of getting these really even the next time I do this. But I just really wanted to show you the conceptual shape. Sometimes there's certain shapes that we have an easier time creating. This one's a little bit harder for me, this one. We're just going to finish this up by adding in just a little bit of a thicker border to it. So I'm just going to go over it a second time. And that's a way you can get rid of some of the woggliness too, just having a little bit more even look to it. And I'm going to do like a half flower, so I have a petal, petal, another petal, and then I'm just adding in the area in the center. And there we go. Then you're adding in that extra line, try to be a little bit more consistent than what I'm being. So here's your mandala image. And so it's a really beautiful way of finding relaxation and creativity. And just by repeating these patterns over and over again, it's a really great way of being able to get a lot better control with your pen work. And it's a really great way of being able to play around with your watercolors. And so I hope you've enjoyed this video, and this has given you some ideas on how you can use mandalas and the color wheel in your art journal. And so if you've enjoyed this video, if you could like, subscribe, and just hit that notification button so you don't miss out on any future videos. I really appreciate the support. And if you're looking for any of the materials I used today, you can see them all in the description below. Those are affiliate links, which is again another way you can support this channel. And if you're looking for another video about doodling, click here. This is one that I did that I hope that you'll really enjoy. So I'll see you in that next video.